At a time when you did not know God, you became slaves to things that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and destitute elemental powers or principles? Do you want to be slaves to them all over again? You are observing days, months, seasons, and years. I am afraid on your account that perhaps I have labored for you in vain. So this is a letter to the community, the church in Galatia, modern-day Turkey, Asia Minor. Now, I saw some interesting similarities, as many have, between this chapter in particular and Colossians 2 that I want to share. Verse 8, see to it that no one captivate you with an empty, seductive philosophy according to human tradition, according to the elemental powers of the world, and not according to Christ. And even when you were dead in transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he, that is Christ, brought you to life along with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, obliterating the bond against us with its legal claims, which was opposed to us. He also removed it from our midst, nailing it to the cross. Despoiling the principalities and the powers, he made a public spectacle of them, leading them away in triumph by it. Practices contrary to faith. Let no one then pass judgment on you in matters of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or new moon, or Sabbath. These are shadows of things to come. The reality belongs to Christ. If you died with Christ to the elemental powers of the world, why do you submit to regulations as if you were still living in the world? So as you can see there, it's a bookend with verse 8 and 20 of these elemental powers. And in the context of both letters and both chapters, people have often said, especially the Sabbatarian and Christian community, those who are pro-law of Moses, that is, those who observe a form of the Sabbath or some of the festivals, or even dietary laws related to the Levitical system, they teach it as if Paul here is speaking only to Gentiles or pagans or former pagans. And this introduction of Paul of the Jewish calendar, reflected by these special days, months, seasons in Galatians, and here being more pronounced with the festival, new moon, or Sabbath, which, by the way, is a trio you find throughout the Tanakh, the Old Testament, as a reflection of the Torah of Moses. So Sabbatarians say that this is not talking specifically to Jews. It's not talking specifically about Torah or even any part of Torah. But I'd like to share some scholarship work that's been done on the word here translated as elemental powers. F. Bruce, in his epistles to the Colossians commentary, he says there are two Pauline letters which use this term, rendered rudiments in the King James and elemental spirits in others, and basic principles. The other is the letter to the Galatians, so we read those. In Galatians 4, these are the forces which regulated both Jewish life under the law and pagan life in the service of beings that by nature are no gods. The Galatian converts' reversion to the domination of those powers was shown in their observance of the Jewish sacred calendar. Since those calendrical divisions are regulated by the heavenly bodies, some association with those powers, with the planets, may be implied. It may be inferred from Colossians 2:16, says F. Bruce, that similar calendrical observances were enjoined by the Colossian heresy. Another scholar notes, in Christ and the law in Paul. Galatians 3 therefore indicate that outside of Christ, Gentiles as well as Jews are hyponomon, that is, under the law. We, quote unquote, in the universal context of the work of Christ, indicates, says Martin, that even the Gentile is under the law, and therefore under the curse of the law. That we are no longer under the law as people who did not know God, and as such, under the schoolmaster, is that Greek word there, is coupled with the fact that you all, Gentiles and Jews, are in Christ Jesus and are sons and heirs. At Galatians 4, God sent forth his Son to redeem those under the law so that we, all of us, that is, Jews and Gentiles, might be sons. At Galatians 4, Paul says that he and his readers were at one time enslaved to the elemental forces or basic principles. And at 4:9, he cannot understand why his readers turn to those very same things again. On the one side, among those forces seems to be the Torah, says Martin, with its statutes, and on the other side is the world of false gods, whom the recipients of the letter once served. For the Galatians to be under the law is to be in as hopeless a position as non-Christian pagans. And he gives more reference there in that footnote. So these scholars seem to be saying that Paul is certainly introducing here, including here, the Jewish calendar, which represents as a whole the law of Torah. And Paul is making a very, if this is true, outrageous claim, especially as a former Pharisee himself. It's outrageous because now Paul is saying to both Gentiles and Jews that as bad as the pagan system are, so has the old covenant system of the law of Moses. That's an implication that these scholars are making. Now, the schoolmaster part of this goes to Galatians 4, and this is a paraphrase by Phillips. Paul says, "But you must realize that so long as an heir is a child, though he is destined to be master of everything, he is in practice no different from a servant. He has to obey a guardian," there's that word, or trustee, "until the time which his father has chosen for him to receive his inheritance. So it is with us. While we were children, we lived under the authority of basic moral principles. But when the proper time came, God sent his Son, born of a human mother, the jurisdiction of the law, that he might redeem those who were under the authority of the law and lead us into becoming, by adoption, true sons of God. It's because you really are his sons that God has sent the Spirit of his Son into your hearts to cry, Father, dear Father, or Abba, Father. You, my brother, are not a servant any longer. You are a son. And if you are a son, then you are certainly an heir of God through Christ." So this is the first section of the other section we read in Galatians. Now, the reason I'm showing you this paraphrase, I think, best captures the fact that Paul is including himself in the discussion about how the basic, worthless, empty elemental powers or basic principles should no longer hold sway for himself as a Jew or other Jews, and likewise for Gentiles who were or might have been pagans who were under the influence or power of the pagan system way of life. So I don't think there's any way of getting around it that you can't sort of read this in a dispensationalist view and say that these letters as a whole are only speaking to one audience in the church, that is Gentiles. It's very clear from Paul's inclusion of himself, the we is pronounced here throughout. I, we, etc. So Paul is including himself in the discussion. So to finish, the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology. The important point is that in Galatians 4, Paul has nothing positive to say about the basic principles of the world, since he knows they have been overcome by Christ. Compared with him, they are weak and miserable, and not the gods the Gentiles believed them to be before conversion. Even the law, that is, the law of Moses, I believe, is reckoned as among these principles, and hence is declared null and void. Thus, the basic principles of the world cover all the things in which humans place trust. Apart from the living God revealed in Christ, they become gods. In Colossians 2:8, human tradition and the basic principles of this world both come under the heading of hollow and deceptive philosophy, which seeks to prey on humankind. Such philosophy has long since been defeated by Christ and has appeared as a captive in his triumphal procession. As in Galatians 4, the basic principles of this world are disapprovingly linked with rules, which may be Jewish legal requirements.